from the News Channel 5 network, this is Open Line.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Open Line. Glad you're with us tonight. We are continuing our two-part discussion, essentially, on this property tax referendum. This referendum that is slated to be voted on here in Davidson County, July 27th. Are there still court battles going on? Yes, but right now it looks like we will vote on this referendum July 27th. Last night, Jim Roberts, who very much supports this referendum, which does 6 different things. The primary thing is restricts the council's power to raise the property tax rate. He was on and talked about why it's a good idea. Tonight, we're going to be talking with some members from Metro schools, essentially, who say it's a very bad idea and are very concerned by this referendum. They join a group, Save Nashville Now, which is really concerned about this referendum and says it would be bad for the city. So, our guests, as always, join us via Zoom. There they are. Christiane Buggs, Metro School Board Chair. Amanda Kail, President of the Metro Nashville Education Association. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having us, Ben.
Well, so last night we heard from a supporter of this. What are your thoughts? I'll just go to each of you. Christiane Buggs first, as School Board Chair. What do you think about this proposed referendum, which again would restrict the council's power to raise the property tax rate?
My focus is the immediate consequence, and maybe it's unintended by those who support it, but it's a consequence that harms children. The idea that social services would need to be cut because we as a city have struggled to maintain a high-level, high-functioning budget, and this historic investment from our mayor and our council that actually pours into city services, that pours into children in our communities, is something that I want us to focus on more. So I would like to, I just want community members to understand the impact of their increased property tax. You know, I've owned a home since I was 23 years old, and I don't mind paying a few $100s extra a year, knowing that our support staff, our teachers, our bus drivers will be paid better, that our firefighters will have more support and more effective equipment, and that our children will be better supported. That's something I just can't stress enough. Okay, Amanda Kail, what do you think about this proposal?
I think it's a terrible idea. You know, I want to echo what Christiane Buggs said. You know, it really will harm the young people in our city the most. You know, one of the things that really strikes me is this really limits our ability to plan as a school district for how we will serve children. If we can't find funding to do what we need to do, if the funding is constantly being rolled back, how do we plan to serve the students that we serve? A lot of our students live in poverty, and you know, public education, it's one of the biggest investments in equity that we make. That means we try to make sure that every child has what they need to go out and be a productive member of society. And so if we're constantly attacking that funding source, I don't know how we move forward. I don't know what kind of future that leaves our children.
So Jim Roberts, again, was on last night. He is the attorney for Good Government, which is the group that's really supporting this. He said something along the lines of this would cap the property tax increase at 3%. That's a fact. It would cap property tax increases to 3%. If it were beyond 3% each year, it would have to go to the Metro Council. This was born, or I'm sorry, it would have to go to voters. Voters would have to vote to approve an increase of more than 3%. And he says 3% is pretty reasonable, and this would prevent this thing we saw here recently where we had a 34% property tax increase after several years of no property tax increase. He says this is just reasonable. It just is reasonable. It's a gradual increase and that kind of thing. You know, so when you hear that, you know, what do you say? And I'll go to Chris. Well, we just lost Christiane Buggs, maybe. What about Amanda Kail? Amanda Kail, what do you say?
Yeah, I think that my response to that would be that it will cost our city a great deal of money to hold all of these elections that this referendum will require. So instead of taking the money and investing it in our children, in our public services that support the people of this city, we will be spending lots of money holding referendum elections for basically the simple functioning of our government. The other thing I will say about the tax increase is, if you don't pay for things for a long time, as you said, we haven't had a property tax increase in a long time. Metro Nashville, Davidson County, we have one of the lowest tax rates in the entire state. And if we don't pay for things for a long time and expenses continue to go up, if salaries, the expected salaries of educators, of firefighters, of so many groups of people, there's such a thing as interest, right? So if our salaries are frozen, you're going to have less and less people who are going to work for that salary. Then the past due amount gets bigger. And so, I think that a lot of people get worried about their tax, what they're going to pay for taxes. I think what people need to understand is it's not the tax rate, it's what the value of your home, what it's been assessed for. We've seen the values of things due to gentrification shoot up, but it's not the tax rate that's causing that to happen.
Right, that is part of this. And Christian Buggs, I'll have you respond too. Now, also it says if this passes in July, it would apparently immediately go into effect. So the city would have to lower the property tax rate, and the impact could be that there would be a $40 million shortfall right out of the gate. If this were to pass July 27th, the fiscal year begins July 1st, again, we may have to come up with $40 million. How concerned are you by that scenario? Oh. Well, there.
You don't hear me there. I'm sorry.
I think, yeah.
Sorry
for a moment, you were frozen. You were so stunned by that question that you could not move.
Well, I've tried to reread through this referendum, and it seems like it puts a lot of burden on voters. And I don't think that's really been elevated in any of these conversations, because we expect our local government to be able to make decisions with kind of a bird's eye view, to be able to understand all the needs across the city, to best understand the moving parts and the nuance of the budget. And the idea that voters would then be tasked with going back and forth and developing referendums, developing amendments to charters, and versus entrusting our local government to be responsible for those things, and then we either supporting it or voting against it. I think that's also a very, very harmful precedent to set. And I could talk all day about the services that this would impact, but if we even just talk about the democratic ramifications, the kind of attacks on democracy, I think it's worth considering.
How concerned are you? I mean, again, Jim Roberts last night said he thinks this is going to pass. People read this and they've just seen a 34% property tax increase, and they're not very happy, and they hear, well, this would cap the increase to 3% and this is going to pass. How concerned are you that will be the argument that kind of wins the day, and that this will pass? And I'll start with you, Christian Buggs.
I'll say I am always the optimistic educator. I believe that if we can just get in front of enough of our neighbors, that if we can humanize this vote, if we can really make parents in the community, educators in the community, grandparents in the community, just concerned community members, if we can make them aware of the consequence of this, I think they'll better understand how to cast their vote, and that it won't pass. Because I think if we can make them understand that for a full year, we were able to feed children, even when we couldn't have them in our school buildings, we were able to feed them because some of them had lost loved ones or even lost homes in a tornado. Then we're impacted twice as hard by a pandemic that hit, but we needed the investment in them. We needed that funding to be able to feed them, to resource them in some way. And if I can explain that, I really do believe that the hearts and minds of our community will be won over by our most vulnerable populations, our students, our homeless, that they'll really understand the firefighters and police officers and teachers that they love will be negatively impacted by this. I think they'll understand and they'll vote a different way. And so I'm trying to remain optimistic and trying to think about all the different, not just heartstrings that we need to pull on, but again, how we humanize this and make these dollars make them make sense for the people in our community.
And Amanda, Kail, what do you think when they're saying the argument that's going to win the day is we just had a 34% property tax increase? It sounds pretty good to cap it at 3%. That's what's going to win the day. What do you think?
I think that the group that's pushing this is a very small group of people. And I think that they claim to be speaking for a lot of people, but in fact, they're not. And so there's so many dangerous things in this referendum. Along, with my colleague here, I could talk for a long time on the devastating impact this will have on families and children in this city. But, also in that referendum, it allows for the recall of elected officials with just 10% of the folks who voted. That is upending what our city does as a majority for a small radical minority. And I think that is just a dangerous place to go. We serve over 50,000 families in Metro in our public schools. And I think that if you were to go to those 50,000 families and say, do you think your schools should have less money? Do you think that you would want to have higher student-teacher ratios? Are you okay with the fact that your child is going to be taught by a permanent sub because there's just no teachers there available? Are you okay with the fact that we have to increase the ratio of counselors and school psychologists? And then we have to also get rid of all of your athletic programs. We have to get rid of all of your arts programs. I just don't see many of those families saying, yeah, that sounds great, sign me up. So I think that the fact that the folks who are pushing this think that they're speaking for the majority of Nashville is incorrect. And I think that if you were to actually talk to the majority of Nashville, they would oppose this.
And Amanda,
if you don't mind jumping back.
Oh, well, yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, because I would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge the idea that there are families out here who are struggling. And so they see a property tax increase and it frustrates and maybe even scares or infuriates them. So I certainly understand that. But again, I want us to remind these community members that there are not only services and programs in place to make sure that homeowners are able to stay in their homes, even with property tax increases, and that there are programs and dollars available to make sure that renters are able to stay in locked that they're able to stay within their means when they're paying for rent. And so I think we've got to be more available to our community to make sure that they understand all the moving parts of this referendum. Yes, all the consequences, but surely all the different programs and dollars that are available for them to make sure that they're not hurt financially by this property tax increase.
So the group that supports this is called, again, For Good Government. And then there's a group that I think you all are part of that's Save Nashville Now. And it's several labor unions. It's a broad coalition, according to what it says, a broad coalition of community organizations, neighborhood leaders, small business owners, taxpayers, homeowners, faith leaders, educators. There's several unions. And Amanda, how engaged with the MNEA, Education Association, how engaged do you think your members will be, and how are you reaching out to them to encourage them to vote, I would think, against this?
Sure. Christian Buggs and I just came from a presentation of the budget at Metro Council, and for the first time, we're seeing an investment in this in actual salaries of teachers, right? We know that our teachers, here in Nashville, we were the 17th best paid teachers in the state of Tennessee, which ranks 43rd in the nation for teacher pay. And so, it's been long past due. 2 years ago, me and thousands of my colleagues spent a great deal of time protesting and making a lot of noise because we were tired of seeing our students go without teachers. It was something we saw constantly, was our students not getting an education. And so, this is the result of years of hard work. I don't think that many educators are willing to just walk away from that and leave it on the table. And so we are reaching out to our members. We are talking. I will say, when you talk about this coalition, it's not often that you find, labor unions and the business community aligned. But in this case, we are. And so that tells you something. When this group says they're speaking for a majority of Nashville, if we have, folks really reaching across that are usually kind of on opposite sides of things saying, no, this is something we have to be united on, I think that really shows you how strongly we oppose it.
And you mentioned, Amanda, there are other parts of this. And last night we kind of went through piece by piece. There's 6 things total on the ballot. Again, the headline, it would restrict the council's power to raise the property tax. That's number 1. But there are 5 others. Some things like it would restrict giving away publicly owned parks and greenways. It would do away with benefits packages for officials. The recall thing that you mentioned, it would make recalls easier. So there's several things. And it's interesting what you're saying. There's obviously this broad coalition that has come out opposed to this. What they would say is, yeah, but we just got thousands of signatures, not once, but twice. We got enough signatures to get this on, and people are hungry for this. And are you concerned that if there's a vote on July 27th, that's not a normal election day, that something like this, where there are these people that signed this petition, they could carry the day? What about those 2 things? A lot of people signed a petition. It's an election on a time where we don't normally have elections. And Christiane, I'll let you start with that.
It's such a nuanced question, but thank you for it. I think that's why I'm so focused on educating the community, really making sure that our neighbors understand what this is going to do, that they understand every moving part of this, that they understand. I mean, we've all taken civics at some point, but being a part of government and understanding the different moving parts and understanding the budget, how it's impacted, how things are caught up, how things catch up to us in a budget year is just really interesting. It's something that I think most people have not really understood. And to offer more context, right now MNPS spends, or we're allotted about $11,000 per child. Even with this $81 million historic investment from the mayor and potentially from the council, we're looking at maybe having $12,000 per child to spend next year, right? Well, to offer you some comparative data, even some of the cheapest private schools in Nashville charge $25,000 to $35,000 per year. So the idea that this increase is something that is unbearable and that, something that we don't need to focus on. I can't help but continue to stress that. And yes, it does make me a bit nervous that this could easily, that they could easily take the day by, shouting from the rooftops that we're just, the property tax rate is just too high and that we don't want to pay any more to government. I understand how that catchphrase, those buzzwords, that salacious wording can really inspire a neighbor to vote against it or to vote for the referendum. But I'm going to continue to push the idea that your neighbors, that the people in your community that you claim to love, the firefighters, the police officers, the teachers, the children, that they will be harmed by this.
Okay. And Amanda, Kail, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, if this passes, it will be devastating for our city. It will, some of these other parts that you mentioned, one of the things that I find the most alarming is how easy it has made recall votes and how it would bar the elected official who's been recalled from running in that recall election. So you have someone who has won. So if someone gets 5,000 votes and they win a seat on Metro Council, 500 people could remove that person. And I think that what we're talking about is overriding the will of the people by having a small majority able to just override everything. And I think that if we talk about all of the referendum elections that would have to happen, not only every time that property is sold, public property is sold, but every time it is leased. So there's a lot of things that go on in Metro government that a lot of people, don't stay up late watching Metro Council meetings about all this stuff. I understand. But the number of referendum votes that all of this would require, number one, would be hugely expensive to the city. And again, we're not going to invest that money in our schools. We're not going to invest it in our fire departments. We're not going to invest it in anything that actually helps people. We're just going to have all of these referendum elections that's going to eat up our money and time. And then second of all, we're going to allow, radical minorities to overturn democratically elected results. And so I just think that there's a lot that's really dangerous in this referendum. As far as how we plan to work on this, our folks, our teachers will be out there, probably knocking on doors. That's part of what we're looking at right now, talking to people. And again, I think that if you were to talk to the vast majority of teachers or families in this city and say, do you want bigger class sizes? Do you want more teacher vacancies? Do you want all these programs cut? I think they would say no. And so, that is effectively what they will be voting for. And, like Christian said, I understand why people get frustrated, but we have a democratic process. What we have to do is engage it, not blow it up.
When you talk about this recall for elected officials, it would lower the number of signatures needed to get a recall, and then the elected official would become a write-in candidate. So his name or her name would not appear on the ballot. It would force a write-in. And that's obviously a concern for some, and that's what it would do. We discussed that last night. All right, we will take a break. We've kind of set the table here. What are your thoughts? We encourage you to call in. There's the number right there at the bottom of the screen, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. We'll take a break. Be back right after this.